Hi, this is Dan in Nature. I'm listening to the breeze. I can see blue sky. The trees around me are still, and I can still hear the wind high above me. This is Dan in Nature. My name is Dan, and I live in a redwood forest, in a tent on almost 4 acres. I feel so peaceful here right now. There's very few birds that I can hear right now. Do you know that feeling when you recorded the perfect episode and then you go back to listen to it and there's nothing there? I thought about trying to recreate that episode, that discussion, that topic, that story. And I realized I would never be able to. So I decided to create a new story. And maybe this new story will incorporate aspects of that missing story. A few days ago, I was outside on a very windy day. And I saw all of these little things falling down all around me. And I didn't know what they were. I guessed that they were some type of a seed. But they didn't look like any pine cone that I was familiar with. I have an app that attempts to use my phone's camera and the internet to identify plants and animals. The one that I like is called Seek. And when I pointed my phone's camera with this app at these things that were falling around me, it first misidentified them as some kind of strange sea creature in another part of the world. And then it misidentified them again as a flower, and that didn't seem right either. On a guess, I did a search for redwood seeds, and I found 2 things. One was expected and one was unexpected. I found that redwoods and Douglas fir both have pine cones. And I found pictures of those pine cones and they look just like I expected them. And I also found that these trees have a second set of pine cones. I learned that there is both a male pollinator and a female pollinator cone on each of these trees. Each of these trees has both. And I was familiar with one set of these pine cones. The female pine cone is the one that I was familiar with, the larger of the two. The male pine cone on these species looks very similar to each other and very different from the pine cone that I'm familiar with. I'll put a link in the description to an article and a photo of these different pine cones. And what I learned is that I will need both the male and the female pollinator cones of each species to propagate these species. Can you hear that? The rustling of some plastic. There's a story about that plastic that I'll tell you soon. I believe that all of the little tiny pine cones that were falling down around me were the male pollinator of the Douglas fir trees around me. And there were thousands and thousands of these little pine cones. I believe that the redwood cones will fall down at a different time of the year. Since that day, I've spent a few hours trying to propagate baby redwood and Douglas fir trees by digging up little baby trees that I found on dirt paths and transplanting them into a pot with rich, nutrient-rich soil. And watering it and giving it lots of sunlight. I've done this with 11 redwood trees and 6 Douglas fir. And I'm waiting to see which of them grows. A few weeks ago, PG&E sent a crew to cut down 2 big redwood trees and 1 big Douglas fir that PG&E claimed were endangering a high voltage power line. I made a video on YouTube of these 3 trees falling down. A memorial to these 3 great giants. making room for the sunshine. I decided that instead of fighting against PG&E, I would allow them to take these 3 trees down, and I would think of these trees as the giving tree. Trees that, after having come down, can be used as lumber to build something here. Something to help me feel, something to help me stay dry and warm. I currently live in a tent, a canvas tent, mostly made of canvas. And this is where the story of the rustling plastic tarp comes in. I bought this canvas tent a year and a half ago from a company, Kodiak Canvas. And within a month of setting it up, I saw pools of water on the floor. The floor is made of a nylon tarp material. The rest of the tent is made of canvas, mostly. I didn't see leaks coming from the ceiling. I saw water beating up on the side. And I left the tent set up for 2 weeks a year ago. I came back 2 weeks later and I found pools of water on the floor of my tent and mold growing on my roof, on the side walls, even on my air mattresses. I spent a lot of time cleaning those surfaces, and since then the material has been less and less waterproof over time, so that this past winter I ended up putting a plastic tarp up. 2 actually. One plastic tarp hung up a few feet above the tent, and another plastic tarp draped right over the roof. I took the one over the roof down when the torrential rains subsided. And the one that is hung up a few feet above the tent is attached to some trees 20 or so feet above the ground. And I have not taken that tarp down. And so it rustles in the wind occasionally. I think we're almost out of the rainy season, and I think I can take that tarp down soon. I spent many hours talking to Kodiak Canvas's warranty claims manager. His name is John. I believe he's the son of the owner of the company. At first, I felt like John was trying to mansplain how to set up a tent so that it stayed dry. And then I felt like John was trying to mansplain why they don't warranty mold. And I felt like I had to spend a lot of hours combing through my photos to find evidence that the tent leaked before the mold was growing. That took me several months. Several months of emails, phone calls, no responses. In the end, I heard John say that he would warranty my tent at a reduced value and that I would have to pay for shipping. And I agreed. I wanted to end that part of my life. Even without the leak, I do not want to live in this tent anymore. The center ridgepole is about 6'2" above the ground, and I can stand up straight in the middle of the tent. And on either side of the tent, the roof goes down to about 4 feet tall. So when I stand inside of my tent, I can only stand in the middle. And when I walk over to the side of my tent, where I keep most of my belongings, I have to bend over. And so my plan this summer is to build a new tent, my own tent, and maybe build a cabin. 2 months ago, during the rainy season, I was researching Henry David Thoreau. I was reading his story, Walden, and I was researching the cabin that he built from recycled parts from another cabin with very minimal tools. And one idea I liked in that story is an idea that I don't need very much. I don't need very much at all. A small cabin with a fireplace is enough for just me. I would like to build that cabin and a tent. One aspect to living in a tent that I love is that my entire roof is a skylight. And in the morning, I can wake up with the sun. Even on a gloomy day, I can see the shadows that the leaves on the trees cast down on my roof and walls. Also this week, I spent many hours. I spent 2 days bringing down a log, a big heavy log. A few weeks ago, I cut down some trees. One of the trees I cut down was a very tall and leaning tan oak tree. And I was feeling scared that the tree might fall down at an inconvenient time and possibly injure someone. And I decided to take this tree down. I plan on posting those videos as well. Those videos show my skill with the chainsaw. And I am not an expert with a chainsaw. When I took down this tree and cut up pieces, I kept a 25-foot log intact up on the hill. to be brought down at some point, to be used to create a retaining wall on my driveway. Before I finish telling that story, I have to back up a little bit. First, I'll back up to mention that I don't have a car currently. I don't have a vehicle. This is the first time in my adult life that I've lived without access to a vehicle. I posted 2 videos on YouTube a while ago. The first 2 logs that I brought down the hill. And for those I used my vehicle to pull those logs down to the driveway, and then I used levers to move those logs, sitting right in front of 2 big redwood trees. Why did I decide to do that? Now I'll take you back a little further. I can hear that wind. I'll take you back to the first time that I brought my kids camping on this land. It was the week leading up to Thanksgiving, and I had just bought this land. And the driveway, which is very steep, just like the rest of this land, was made entirely of soil and covered in a fine array of redwood leaves. I used my 4-cylinder, 2-wheel drive, hybrid Toyota Highlander to pull my very small trailer. I've taken this trailer to Colorado and to New York and New Jersey with my kids, and that's a fun trip. There's a lot of time camping outside because the trailer is very small. If you look on YouTube, you can find at least 1 video of my trailer. I think I'm going to make this episode a 2-parter. So, if you want to hear the rest of this story, you got to listen to the next episode. This is Dan in Nature. Peace.